The father who learned to dance. I've never been a dancer. Not at weddings, not at parties, not even in the privacy of my own home. My late wife, Emily, used to tease me about it, always trying to pull me onto the dance floor, always laughing when I shuffled awkwardly from side to side. "One day, you'll regret this," she used to say with that knowing smile of hers. But I never listened. I hated the feeling of eyes on me, the pressure of getting the steps right, the awkwardness of moving my body in ways that never felt natural. Even at our own wedding, when she convinced me to dance just one song, I spent the whole time stiff as a board while she twirled effortlessly in my arms. "Loosen up, Dave," she had whispered with a laugh, pressing her forehead against mine. "One day, you'll wish you had more moments like this." I had rolled my eyes and promised her I wouldn't. But now, years later, I wasn't so sure anymore. Especially when my daughter, Lily, announced she was getting married. It was the happiest I had ever seen her, and as she sat across from me at the dinner table, gushing about the wedding plans, I felt a warmth in my chest that I hadn't felt in a long time. She talked about the venue, the dress, the flowers, all the things her mother would have helped her pick out if she were still here. She looked so much like Emily in that moment, her eyes shining with excitement, her hands gesturing wildly as she described every detail. It hurt, seeing how much she must have missed her mother during this time, but she never let it show. Then, almost as an afterthought, she said, "Oh, and don't worry about the father-daughter dance, Dad. I know you don't dance." She said it so casually, so gently, like she was doing me a favor by not expecting anything from me. And that's what hurt the most. She didn't even ask. She had already made peace with the idea that I wouldn't be there for that moment, that I would be sitting at the sidelines while she swayed in the arms of another man, her new husband, because her father was too afraid to step onto the dance floor. I forced a smile, but something inside me cracked. I had been a good father in every way I knew how. I had raised her alone after Emily passed, made sure she never wanted for anything, supported her in every dream she chased. But in this one moment, on one of the biggest days of her life, I was going to let her dance alone. The thought made my throat tighten. Maybe Emily had been right all along. Maybe I would regret this. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to do something about it. That night, after Lily left, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. The house was quiet, as it always was these days. Too quiet. It was a silence I had learned to live with after Emily passed, but tonight, it felt heavier, like a weight pressing down on my chest. When Emily was alive, there was always music in this house. She loved to dance, loved to fill every space with life and movement. She would put on an old record while she cooked, humming along as she swayed her hips, sometimes twirling barefoot across the kitchen tiles. She had this habit of grabbing my hands, trying to pull me in, laughing when I refused. "Just one song, Dave," she'd plead, tugging at my arms. "One day you'll dance, and I won't be here to see it." I used to roll my eyes at that, dismiss it with a shake of my head. I never thought much about what she was really saying. I never imagined a day would come when she wouldn't be here, when the music would stop, when I would be left sitting in the same kitchen, the same house, surrounded by nothing but silence and regret. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing a hand over my face, feeling an ache in my chest that had nothing to do with age. This wasn't just about the dance. It was about something much bigger. Lily had already accepted that I wouldn't do it, just like Emily had eventually stopped asking. And that realization hit me harder than I expected. How many moments had I let slip away because I was too stubborn, too self-conscious, too unwilling to step outside my comfort zone? I thought back to when Lily was little, how she used to stand on my feet, giggling, as I shuffled clumsily around the living room. Back then, she didn't care that I had 2 left feet. She didn't care that I had no rhythm. She just wanted to dance with her dad. But I had let that slip away. I had let fear, no, pride, keep me from giving her that moment again. And now, I was about to let it take away one of the most important moments of her life. I looked around the house, my eyes landing on the framed pictures on the walls. So many memories, so many milestones captured in time: Lily's first steps, her first day of school, her high school graduation. But something was missing. There was no photo of Emily and me dancing at our wedding because I had barely moved at all. No father-daughter dance at Lily's birthday parties. Just gaps where those memories should have been. Emily would have been so disappointed in me. I exhaled slowly, feeling my chest tighten. Then, before I could talk myself out of it, I reached for my phone and typed in something I never thought I'd need: beginner dance lessons near me. The next evening, I found myself standing outside a small dance studio on the other side of town. Through the large windows, I could see couples moving gracefully across the floor, their bodies in perfect sync with the music. I felt like an idiot just being there. What was I thinking? I was a 46-year-old man who had spent his entire life avoiding dance floors, and now I expected to magically learn in time for Lily's wedding? The thought of turning around and walking away was tempting, but then I imagined her face, her small, resigned smile when she said, "I know you don't dance." The quiet way she had already accepted that I wouldn't try. I had spent so much of her life being there for her, helping with school projects, fixing her first car, sitting through endless piano recitals I barely understood. I had done everything I knew how to do to be a good father. But in this one thing, I had failed her, just as I had failed Emily. I squared my shoulders, swallowed my pride, and pushed open the door. The studio smelled like polished wood and faint traces of perfume. A woman in her 50s, dressed in elegant black, turned toward me with a warm smile. "You must be David," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Carla. You're here for the private lessons?" I hesitated for only a second before nodding. She led me to the center of the room and started with the basics: how to hold my posture, where to place my hands, how to shift my weight properly. I thought I would pick it up quickly, but the moment I tried to step to the music, I felt like a fool. My feet were too slow, too stiff. I stepped on Carla's toes more than once, muttering apologies under my breath. My arms felt awkward, my body rigid. This was a mistake. I didn't belong here. But Carla just smiled and said, "Again." So I tried again. And again. And again. For an hour, she walked me through each step, her patience never wavering. By the time I left, my shirt was damp with sweat, and my legs ached. I had never felt so ridiculous in my life. But as I drove home that night, something strange happened. I found myself tapping my fingers against the steering wheel, replaying the rhythm in my head. For the first time, the music didn't feel like something separate from me, it was something I was starting to understand. I kept going back. Night after night, I showed up at that studio, pushing through the frustration, the embarrassment, the nagging voice in my head that told me this was impossible. The first week was brutal. My feet refused to cooperate, my rhythm was non-existent, and every step felt like a battle against my own body. More than once, I considered quitting. What if I made a fool of myself at the wedding? What if Lily regretted asking me in the first place? But every time those thoughts crept in, I forced myself to remember why I was doing this. It wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't even about impressing anyone. It was about showing up. It was about proving to my daughter that I was willing to step outside my comfort zone for her, that she mattered enough for me to try. So I swallowed my pride and kept going. After a few weeks, something strange happened. My feet started to find the rhythm, and my body stopped fighting the movements so much. Carla noticed it too. "See? You're getting it," she said one night after a particularly smooth run-through of the song I had chosen for the wedding. I let out a breathless laugh, shaking my head. "I can't believe I waited this long to do this." Carla just smiled knowingly. "Most people wait too long to dance." Her words stuck with me. I thought about all the times I had sat on the sidelines, refusing to let go of my own discomfort. How many moments had I missed with Emily because I had been too stubborn? How many times had Lily hoped I would step onto the dance floor, only to be disappointed when I didn't? This wasn't just about a wedding. It was about every missed opportunity before it. And suddenly, I wasn't just learning to dance for Lily. I was dancing for Emily, for all the times she had begged me to join her, for all the times I had refused. I was dancing for the man I could have been, and maybe, just maybe, the man I still had time to become. The wedding day arrived faster than I expected. As I stood in my suit, watching Lily float across the venue in her dress, I felt a lump rise in my throat. She looked so much like her mother, radiant, joyful, glowing with love. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, yet my hands still trembled as I waited for the music to start. What if I forgot everything? What if I messed up in front of everyone? But then Lily turned to me, her eyes filled with warmth, and reached for my hand. "Ready, Dad?" she whispered, completely unaware of how much that question meant to me. I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and nodded. The music began, and I led her onto the dance floor. At first, we swayed gently, the way I had always imagined a father-daughter dance would go. But then, when the time was right, I took a step back and really danced. I turned her gracefully, guiding her through the steps I had spent months perfecting in secret. Gasps rippled through the crowd as our simple sway turned into a beautifully choreographed dance. I heard Lily let out a surprised laugh, her hands tightening around mine. "Dad, you learned this for me?" Her voice cracked slightly, and I saw the tears forming in her eyes. I smiled, my own vision blurring. Of course I did. As the final note played and I spun her one last time, the entire room erupted in applause. But I barely heard it. All I could see was Lily's face, overwhelmed, emotional, grateful. In that moment, I knew this dance wasn't just about the wedding. It was about showing up, about proving that it's never too late to step up for the people you love. I pulled her into a hug, and she whispered into my ear, "Mom would have been so proud of you." A tear slipped down my cheek, but I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the dance floor. I wasn't afraid of looking foolish or stepping out of rhythm. Because tonight, I hadn't just learned to dance, I had learned what it meant to be a father in a way I never had before. Story number 2. Reuniting with a childhood friend in the most unexpected way. I never thought a simple trip to the grocery store could feel like stepping into a time machine. It was an ordinary Tuesday evening, and I was drained from another long, uneventful day at work. The fluorescent lights of the small market buzzed overhead as I lazily pushed my cart down the aisles, my mind elsewhere. I wasn't paying much attention to the people around me, just another crowd of strangers, each lost in their own routine. As I reached for a box of cereal, I noticed someone out of the corner of my eye, lingering near the dairy section. There was something oddly familiar about the way she stood, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I tried to ignore the nagging feeling, convincing myself that it was just my overactive imagination. But as I turned down another aisle and caught another glimpse of her, the sense of familiarity only deepened. It was like seeing a shadow from a forgotten memory, just out of reach, yet impossible to ignore. My heart began to pound for reasons I couldn't quite explain. I hesitated, torn between curiosity and the fear of embarrassing myself. After all, what were the chances that I actually knew this person? The city was vast, filled with thousands of people who looked like someone from the past but weren't. I gave myself a silent lecture, convincing myself to let it go, but my feet betrayed me. Without fully realizing it, I drifted toward the dairy section, my hands suddenly cold and clammy. I told myself I was just grabbing some milk, but my eyes kept flickering toward her as I approached. I watched as she examined a carton of yogurt, tilting it slightly in her hands, her lips pressing together as if deep in thought. The longer I looked, the harder it became to deny it. This wasn't just some stranger. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry, as I took a tentative step closer. I could feel my pulse in my ears, hear the blood rushing through my head. My voice caught in my throat, and for a moment, I thought about walking away. But something in me refused to let this moment slip by. And so, before I could stop myself, I spoke. "Excuse me," I said, my voice coming out softer than I intended. She turned slightly, her brow furrowing as she met my gaze. And then, in an instant, I saw it, the flicker of recognition, the widening of her eyes, the way her lips parted slightly in surprise. It was like watching a door open to the past, a past I hadn't thought about in years but suddenly felt as fresh as yesterday. I hesitated, afraid I was wrong, but then she whispered my name. "Daniel?" It wasn't just the word, but the way she said it, hesitant yet warm, like she was testing the possibility aloud, trying to make sense of the moment. I felt my breath catch. "Sarah?" The name barely left my lips before she broke into a smile, her face lighting up in a way that made my stomach flip. We stood there, staring at each other, both of us momentarily frozen in disbelief. The air between us felt charged, heavy with the weight of years we had lost. She let out a breathy laugh, shaking her head. "I can't believe this," she said, almost to herself. "What are you doing here?" I wanted to laugh, too. What was I doing here? What was she doing here? What were the odds that after all these years, we would just run into each other in a grocery store? The last time I had seen Sarah, we had been kids, barely teenagers, standing in her driveway on the day her family moved away. I remember how we had promised to stay in touch, how we had sworn we wouldn't let distance pull us apart. But life, as it often does, had other plans. I had always wondered where she ended up, what kind of life she had built, if she ever thought about those endless summer afternoons spent riding bikes, climbing trees, and dreaming about the future. And now, here she was, no longer a freckle-faced 12-year-old, but a grown woman standing in front of me, looking just as stunned as I felt. We both spoke at the same time, blurting out different questions, before laughing at ourselves. "Wait," I said, grinning. "This is crazy. We need to sit down. Catch up properly." She nodded, still smiling, as if she couldn't believe this was real. And just like that, with a single moment of fate, a lost connection began to find its way back.